Okay, welcome again to everybody to the CYP Club Stay at Home series. I'm your host, Derek Grosso, and today we're going to be talking about financial wellness. The Columbus Young Professionals Club is a membership network and a hub for social and business networking. But of course, we cannot get together and do a lot of that social and business networking in person. So we've transitioned to our Stay at Home series, which has been pretty well received over the last several weeks. Today, we're going to be trying out something called the Quick Bite. So most of these events have been about an hour or so. This one's going to be around 30 minutes. And with us, we've got three outstanding panelists who are going to speak with us about financial wellness. We've got about 30 minutes. And those folks who want to join us in our Zoom call, as well as live on YouTube, we're going to be offering an interactive discussion featuring three young financial planning professionals who will review how you can control your finances now and answer any of your questions live. We've got Kevin Clark, who is a financial advisor with Ameriprise Financial Services. We've also got Acie Milton, who's Paraplanner at Rebel Financial. And we've also got Annie Sidwell, who's a family wealth advisor with Wealthstone Advisors. So we're going to go to the grid view and see how everyone's doing. Go ahead and give a wave. We got a couple people on the call as well. And I'm going to kick it over to Kevin. If anyone who's on the call, if you have questions for us, go ahead and use the chat feature. Or if you're familiar enough with Zoom and you want to raise your hand in the Zoom meeting, we'll have some time for questions at the end. Each speaker is going to talk for about 5 minutes or so on different topics. So I'm going to give it over to Kevin. And Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Derek. Thank you to CYP Club, CYP Club Cares, all the other organizations that have helped put this together today. And then thanks to all of you that are watching. As Derek mentioned, this is the first in a series of calls that we're going to do that we're broadly calling financial wellness. So again, my name's Kevin Clark. I am the Career Development Director for the Financial Planning Association of Central Ohio. And I am a certified financial planner at Ameriprise. I've spent the last 6 years personally advising individuals and families about their money. And I am joined by another two really great, brilliant financial planners, also in the Next Gen segment from FPA. And I'll let them kind of give an introduction for themselves, starting with Annie.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. So Annie Sidwell, I work with Wealthstone Advisors. And Wealthstone Advisors has actually been around for a little over 40 years. So where my specialty is within the team is to serve Next Gen, and we call them G2, but actually we're starting to get G3s. So it's nice to have a peer group and you start seeing, common goals. And so it's really nice to connect and have clients going through the similar things that I am.
Yep, and I'm Acie Middleton. I'm with Rebel Financial. I'm actually a certified financial education instructor. Rebel Financial started roughly around 2013 as a social enterprise, so we're relatively new. As a paraplanner, I work on the more technical aspect of things, especially dealing with clients and their spending habits, more or less.
Awesome. Thanks, Acie and Annie. Now I'll just kind of get into a brief overview of how the rest of this call will work, what we're trying to do, and then also just get into our program. So our goal with this series is to provide you with some practical tools and information that you can use just to begin setting yourself up for success or continuing on success. Each of the three of us will talk for about 5 minutes. We'll leave 10 to 15 minutes at the end for any questions. If you do have a question or any other feedback, there is a group chat feature here in the Zoom call. Might also be one if you're watching on YouTube as well there. But feel free to submit any comments or questions as we go along. We want you to be able to take away one or two things that's useful to you. And we also are looking for feedback for any future calls. So if there's something we don't get to today that you would like us to talk about in the future, please submit that as well, and we'll be sure to try to work it into a future program. But today's is going to be just starting at the beginning and looking at 3 different ways for you to get started on financial planning, and really boils down to the building blocks on everything else. All 3 of us do serve young professionals in some capacity, but we each have different ways of doing it, Annie, Acie, and I. So we have different philosophies, different processes that appeal to different types of people. So our hope is that between the three of us, at least one will resonate with you and kind of make sense for what might work to implement in your life. And I'm going to start by talking about my process, which is mainly about just defining and prioritizing personal individual goals that you have. Acie has a very good process that focuses more on your spending patterns, monitoring and tracking those. He'll go second and talk about that. And then Annie has kind of the inverse, where she focuses a lot on saving strategies, and whatever's left at the end is kind of what you're able to spend. So 3 different ways of looking at it. We'll each have our own little practical tips and stuff in there. And again, hopefully at least one of them will sound like something that you could actually take and implement in your life. So starting with mine, I have a very goals-based type of thing. Anytime I sit down with someone who's younger and looking to start out, our first discussion is a multi-step process of a lot of people can name off some of their priorities or milestones that they have in life. For younger people, you hear a lot of student loans, getting those paid off, getting married, buying a house, raising children, and then retirement is kind of a universal goal. But it is a difficult process sometimes to actually define what those look like and how to get started on a lot of them and when you should start on them. So that's the basis of a lot of my initial meetings with people. And I'll just kind of go through today some of the big ones and some of the individual things that I've seen or talk about for some of those bigger events. So starting with marriage, a lot of people do have an idea of what their wedding looks like, maybe even have a dollar budget in mind. If you just have a vision for it but don't know the cost, what I typically suggest first of all is don't be afraid to do your research. Go out and look for quotes, get an idea of what the individual types of services might cost, and use those to put together a budget of what the wedding might cost you in total. The other thing is don't be afraid to use people that are already in your friends and family network or people that you're already inviting to the wedding. I have seen a lot of clients, to try to mitigate some of those costs, they will ask guests for their wedding if they can do a certain service for the wedding as the gift, rather than going to the registry and having the bride and groom need to go ahead and pay somebody else to do something like photography. So don't be afraid to use your network and try to look for creative ways to reduce the cost if you feel the budget might be getting out of control on a wedding. Buying a house, this is one where a lot of the work should be done before you even go start looking at houses. If you don't already, Credit Karma is a great site. I'd encourage you to go and sign up for an account there. You'll be able to track your credit score, and they've got a lot of other really good financial tools you can use on there. Ideally, for a credit score to qualify for some of those best rates on a mortgage, you would like to see a credit score of at least 620. Obviously, if it's in the 700s, that's even better. But what I tell people, if they're not there yet for one reason or another, don't get discouraged. There are resources out there. There are free credit counselors that can talk about ways to increase your score to potentially qualify for better rates. Or if it's not going to fit within your time frame on when you'd like to buy a house to get up to the certain level, don't get discouraged either. You're still going to have ways to finance the house. It might be a little more expensive, but you will still potentially, with good habits, be able to build that score up and eventually refinance to a better rate down the road. And the other thing is a pre-approval letter. That shows that you're a serious buyer. So you will want to get that before you hire a realtor or go look at houses. But you want to be careful with that, because a lot of lenders and banks will approve you for an amount that's actually well above what you should be spending. So a better practice that I've seen is get an idea of what a comfortable payment is. Make sure you include property taxes, insurance, HOA fees, renovations, any costs that might go into it, and use that to back into what your top end on the house price should be, and ask the lender or bank, make that my maximum, so that I'm not inadvertently going and seeing or potentially putting the stuff down on stuff I might not be able to afford. But be careful there. A lot of the prep work there for buying a house goes into it before that first viewing. Raising children can be one of the costliest, but also one of the most rewarding goals that you have. This is another one where advanced planning, if it's possible, can really pay off for you. You want to get an idea up front for what additional costs or increased costs you're going to have, looking at how much more your health insurance is going to be, whether you might want to get life insurance to protect them and your family, costs of daycare, and especially the big one I see is either private school or college planning. If you do want to send a child to one of those, it's best to get an idea up front of how much you would like to be able to support them on those, as well as just having an idea up front, because that is a goal that you will want to try to start spending for that as early as possible, ideally after the baby is born, right then, because the longer that you're saving toward it, the better off you and the child will be at paying for those costs down the road. And then the last one is retirement. So this one is especially difficult for younger people because it's really difficult to think about what that means. I typically suggest, first of all, what does retirement mean to you? What's your definition? Are you completely stopping working at all? Are you reducing to part-time? Or are you switching to something that's more of a hobby or a passion that you would like to do? Get an idea of what that looks like. What your lifestyle is going to be is the toughest part for most people. I typically just look at what they're spending now, take 100% of that number, and then adjust it based on lifestyle or other things that people want to do. And then also be sure to just know what the different dates are out there for benefits. Medicare and Social Security will be there in some form. Public servants do have public benefits and pensions. Know the dates and amounts for that. And lastly, on retirement, always plan for living a lot longer. Our generation especially, you should expect to live well into your 90s, if not 100, based on what medicine is doing right now and just general life trends. So try to package all that together, get an idea, but the last step, once you have those all identified, is the prioritization. Figure out which one of those goals is most important and needs to be addressed immediately. That's your first goal, and then just go down the line. And ideally, you have some resources going to each of your goals, but you're going to dedicate the most amount of resources to that top goal. So with that, that was a lot of information, but I'll switch it over to Acie now to talk about his spending approach.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kevin. So obviously, spending is a really intense topic for a lot of people. It's probably the least sexy part of financial planning, obviously, but we always ask why care, right? I personally have a saying: you either have more month than money or more money than month. So you really have to figure out if you're operating at a deficit at any point in time, because you're left with really one or two options. You either cut expenses or find a way to generate more income, which means that spending is the most important part of financial planning, just because it's really the only thing that you can control long term. You can do your best to generate more income. If you're looking to be employed, obviously you're relying on an employer. If you're dealing with investments, you're relying on the markets. All of that is outside of your control, but you can control your expenses. So with that being said, we're going to work on trying to figure out what your money picture looks like. And we're going to figure out a way to reshape the way that you think about your finances. So you're going to hear me say a couple of things pretty frequently, the 3 buckets. So when I'm talking about 3 buckets, I'm talking about past, present, and future. So you have static monies, or like your 30-day sort of revolving things. You have your controllable and variable expenses, which are more present. Usually those operate on 7 days. And then you're talking about more dynamic, so future goals. So that's, if you break that down again, you're talking about your obligations, you're talking about your expenses, and then you're talking about your desires. Now, how do you map all of that out, right? First things first, you create a budget. You track your spending. Some people like to do 30 days. Some people like to do 3-6 months. Some people do an entire year. But once you track your spending, you categorize that and you can figure out where all your money is going. Now, A budget is not enough. What you need to do next is create a cash flow management system. You need to take that and juxtapose it by your liabilities and obligations, because that really shows you where your money is going. Once you know that, you can figure out where your opportunities are. You can see your money leaks. You can definitely see if you're over leveraged. And when I'm talking about over leveraged, I'm talking about, do you have too many of your obligations going towards like credit cards? Credit cards can be a killer. The main thing that you want to do is you ideally want to be utilizing less than 30% of your credit lines. But obviously not everybody can do that. So here are a couple golden rules as far as your personal finance. You can feel free to write these down. Obviously I have 5 minutes, so I'll be going through them really quickly. Just a disclaimer, these are generalized benchmarks. Everybody's personal situation needs to be taken into account. These are ideals that we kind of set when we're giving advice. Your circumstances may dictate whether or not you can hit these or not. But going back to the 3 buckets, 50, 30, 20, you probably heard that before. So 50% of your available cash should be going to necessities, living expenses, things of that sort. You want to limit 30% of your salary to discretionary spending if you can. You also want to make sure that you include about that extra 20% into savings. Again, these are generalized benchmarks. Not everybody can do that, but that's kind of the golden rule that we tell people to abide by. When you're talking about major purchases, you need to plan for spending. So what does that mean? If we're talking about cars, that means 24 and 10, 20% down, don't finance for anything more than 4 years. And then you generally want to replace your car every 10 years because you hit that breaking point where the expenses on maintaining the vehicle become more costly than actually buying a new vehicle. And then for homes, you're talking about 20 and 3, 20% down, ideally. That helps you avoid a lot of other expenses. And then you want to be able to save up to 3 years of your gross annual income. That really determines what you're able to spend as far as home purchasing. And then if we're talking about retirement, 10, 6, and 20. So at least if you can't do the 20%, at least go for 10% of your money needs to go to retirement. 6 months you want to keep in an emergency fund. Again, that's a benchmark. And 20 times, as far as your overall retirement accounts, should be equal to 20 times your gross annual income. Now, if you can't hit that 6 months, which a lot of people can't do, first things first, you want to try and get at least $500 saved. If you can do that, then you can move to 300. You can move to 3 months, 6 months, and then that's the way you get there. But $500 is a great starting place. Now, controlling your spending. Let's make this practical, right? Going back to the 3 buckets. Have a checking account, savings account, and then your retirement accounts. Automate your spending where you can. Again, I have a saying, you automate to avoid inflation. You create allowances to avoid inflation, and you automate with intention. So you take the money, you automate your savings so it gets pulled out of your account directly. You don't see it, it doesn't hurt. That money was really never in your hands, so you never saw it go anywhere. But that account is growing on its own the entire time. If you have expenses that you can automate, auto pay. I know a lot of people don't like to do that because payments may vary, but it's a great thing. Again, that money leaves your account before you ever have a chance to see it or make a negative decision about it. As far as allowances, give yourself a cash allowance. They call it the money diet. Whatever you plan to spend as far as discretionary spending, get it in cash. The reason being is because there's something that we call the pain of paying. Every physical dollar that leaves your hand hurts a little bit. Whereas if you have a credit card or a debit card, it doesn't mean as much. Swipe the card all you want. You don't feel the same pain as you do literally handing over $1, right? So again, going back to intention, do these purchases move me further towards my goal? If they don't, then you probably need to make a decision on it. If you can't make a decision, wait a day, wait a week. If you feel the same about it, come back to it. Maybe it is something that you need. And avoid lifestyle inflation. The reason I say this is because the more money you have, the more money you're likely to spend. That's why intention is so important. If you spend with intention, that brings the highest levels of satisfaction and fulfillment. I guarantee you moving closer to your goals becomes easier. With that, move it on to Annie.
Thank you, Acie. Yeah, so as Kevin discussed earlier, we all have different approaches. And as far as budgets and expenses, as Acie mentioned, it's super important to know where your money is going. I have a lot of people where when we first talk at a planning meeting and you ask how much they spend, they get a little uncomfortable, or they're perhaps embarrassed that they don't know where they spend or how much they spend. One, that is completely normal. And that's what Acie was saying with credit cards and automatic payments and such, which are super helpful at times. Sometimes they create these places where you aren't really sure where your money's going. So one place to start is you could say, how much do you, what's your inflow? How much money do you have coming in? How much are you saving? Typically people know that either through their employer sponsored plan, they know that they transfer money to a savings account every month. So if you know how much you make, if you know how much you save, and you operate under the assumption that you're spending the rest, that kind of gives you a starting point. So with that savings goal, and as Acie mentioned, a general rule that we like to talk about is 10 to 20% toward debt repayment, such as student loans, or goals planning. So that's where we have the shorter term goals, longer term goals, and any charitable giving that maybe speaks to your heart. So the first is the emergency fund, that 3 to 6 months of living expenses. Obviously, times like now are where people are very thankful that they set aside that 3 to 6 months. If that's not something in your current financial picture right now, then that's something definitely to work forward to. That's kind of the first goal. That way, either again, times like now, or if you had a job change, maybe a spouse was moving and maybe for a job, maybe it would take you a little longer to get employed. It just gives you the comfort. And again, maybe that situation, you'd have more time to search for the right job for you rather than just jumping into something if you didn't have that 3 to 6 months buffer. A good place to park those savings is a checking or savings account. I wish I could tell you with great conviction that a money market could give you the 2%. Right now, they are not offering that. But that's something to look forward to is if the money markets come back up, that's a good place to park those short-term savings emergency fund. The next I'll talk about is the shorter term goals. So let's say that's under 10 years for the sake of today's conversation. Maybe it's a wedding, maybe it's a child, just the expenses that come along in the first few years. Maybe it's a car. That's a good place to start looking into investing. And that's where you want to talk to your advisor and make sure you're matching the duration of your investments and your goals, because you don't want to be too invested into the market of just stocks, have volatility, and having to be a forced seller. So essentially, if you need the money and under that 10 years and you get caught where the market's at a low point, you want to give your investments enough time to recover. So just being careful with that. But again, those medium-term goals are a place of maybe it's a mix of some in a money market and some invested. As you go a little bit further into long-term goals, such as retirement planning or maybe education planning, that's where you definitely want to take advantage of investing, just as anything. So as compounding. So when you spend more than you should, you are not giving yourself an opportunity to, one, invest, and two, let those investments work for you over time. So just how interest can compound, so can savings, so can your investments. So you want to take advantage of that. We kind of recommend one place to go is your employer sponsored plan. Those are great because they give you a menu of investment options that they've vetted for you. You can choose those. They have target date funds if you wanted to look into those as well. That will adjust your allocation over time. We like to say of looking into your employer match, because that is free money. There's not many times you can get that. One note I like to say about that is when you're looking at different careers or maybe switching careers, is think about what their employer match is. Some are significantly more competitive than others. So if you think of that as part of your entire compensation plan, you may have an employer that has the exact same salary as the next, but one gives you a more competitive employer match, or maybe an HSA match, other things like that. So taking advantage of employer match, that's for sure, that's a no-brainer. From there, you can look into if that doesn't meet your 10%. So let's say you want to do 10% into your 401k, the employer match is only 4%, that other 6% toward retirement, that can be done. And this really depends on your personal situation. So I would talk to your advisor, I would talk to your accountant. But if you could qualify for a Roth IRA, a traditional IRA, and then you can always go back and just do all 10% of your 401k if that's what you want. So the point today is just to know there are options. If you've heard of Roths or you like Roths, and keep in mind, a lot of employer plans do offer Roth 401ks. A lot of people don't know that. So that's something to think of too. And I guess my just general rule is talk to your advisor, talk to your accountant, know what plans are out there for you. Having that general 10 to 20%. And as Acie said, just watching that as you make more money, see if you can't increase that percentage as well. It's one of those things, if you may not even notice it's gone. So that's, as Kevin said earlier too, this is our very high level kind of building blocks of where we like to start. And we encourage you to look at your own financial situation and see what's best for you in the next, getting one step closer to ultimate financial wellness. So thank you.
Perfect. And yeah, I'll just add a couple other things and then we'll open it up for questions. So as Annie mentioned there, as you're trying to implement some of these things in your own life, if you do get stuck or feel overwhelmed, don't be afraid to ask for help, either from a professional or somebody you trust. And the last thing, and speaking for all three of us, if you have a partner or a spouse, always be sure to include them in the discussion from the beginning. It's going to make your relationship a lot better. Also give you a much better chance of accomplishing the goals if you're working together on that. So with all of that said, I'll open it up for any questions that anybody has.
Don't everybody jump at once. Well, I know you guys covered a lot, and I appreciate you giving your time for the first in this quick bite version of our stay-at-home series. Just kind of seeing if there are any questions. It looks like we got one. All right. Oh, well, this is a thank you to all of the speakers for your time and expertise. So that's a tip of the hat to the three of you for knowing your stuff and being able to kind of break it down in a 5 minutes or so, 5 minutes or so time limit. Everyone's saying got some great comments are coming in, very helpful. Thanks everyone. I wanted to take some time to also mention that the Stay at Home series is something that we're continuing as an ongoing virtual live event series through the Columbus Young Professionals Club, and anybody can participate through our Zoom calls as well as watching the live streams. Sometimes they're on Facebook, sometimes they're on YouTube, and we're starting to do some Instagram stories as well. But coming up next, we have this Friday, we're going to do a virtual magic show. So that'll be Friday evening at 7 p.m., May 15th. Michael Kent, he's been all over the world doing his magic, and he's also lends lots of comedic talents, and he's a Columbus guy too, so he's local. Then next week, we're going to try our first yoga class with Julie Wilkes in 7 Studios, and that's going to be May 18th. That's a Monday, followed by another quick bite session on mental wellness on May 19th. On May 22nd, we're going to bring this group again together to talk about hazards to your wealth, some of the common mistakes and pitfalls and ways to avoid. So we're going to hear from Annie and Acie and Kevin again. And then we've got 2 other events to wrap up the month with our series. May 22nd, I'm sorry, one more event, 2 more events. I was right the first time. May 22nd is going to be Entrepreneurs and Innovators. And that's a Friday. I misspoke. I said that was the next Financial Wellness. And the 26th, which is a Tuesday, is another quick bite with hazards to your wealth. And then finally, May 29th, which is a Friday at noon, we're going to be talking about ways to impact the community with members of our Columbus Impact Academy. So again, thank you all for being a part of this. Thanks to everybody at home, which is pretty much everybody, I guess, except for Acie, because Acie was telling us that he's back at work taking the precautions. So as everybody's slow to get back to work, and many of those who are still continuing to work at home, stay safe, be well. Let us know how we can continue to help.